Last time, I told you about a man who quit the piano because he couldn't be the best. A man who destroyed his own father's company and rebuilt it from scratch. A man who sat in the back of a New York taxi, asked a driver if he knew who the president of France was, and got nothing. Then asked if he'd heard of Christian Dior, and watched the driver light up with recognition. In that moment, Bernard Arnault understood the most important secret in business. Luxury brands are more powerful than governments. Presidents expire. Dreams never expire. He came back to France in 1983, 34 years old, one question burning through his engineer's brain like acid: what can I buy? And in 1984, he found his answer. A bankrupt, crumbling, debt-swallowed textile empire called Boussac Saint-Frères, a company so destroyed that the French government itself couldn't save it. He's going to spend $15 million, every franc his family has, to buy it. And everyone in France, every banker, every journalist, every politician, is going to think he has completely lost his mind. But Bernard Arnault hasn't lost his mind. He's the only person in France who can see what's really inside that wreckage. Because buried under the mountain of debt, hidden behind the shuttered factories and the worthless textile divisions, there is a diamond, and its name is Christian Dior. Before we go further, I need to tell you two things. First, there's a detail in this story about a secret partnership with the most powerful bank in France that's straight out of a spy movie. It involves a deal structure so devious that even the people who got betrayed didn't realize it for years. And second, by the end of this video, you'll understand a business strategy so ruthless, so coldly efficient, that it has a name. The French call it Depecage. It means butchering. And Bernard Arnault is about to become the greatest butcher in the history of corporate France. This is to understand what Bernard Arnault did in 1984, you first need to understand what Boussac Saint-Frères was, and how a titan became a carcass. Marcel Boussac was a legend, one of the richest men in post-war France, a textile baron who built an empire of cotton mills, factories and brands that stretched across the entire country. At his peak in the 1950s and 60s, Boussac employed over 30,000 workers across France. He owned newspapers, including Le Figaro for a period. He owned racehorses, some of the finest thoroughbreds in Europe, winners at Longchamp and Deauville. He owned vast tracts of land across northern France. He lived like a king. And in 1946, Marcel Boussac made one decision that would echo through history for the next 80 years. He bankrolled a young, unknown, desperately ambitious designer named Christian Dior. Dior had no money, no backing, no brand. He had only one thing, an idea so radical, so beautiful, so perfectly timed that it would change what women wore for the rest of the century. Boussac saw something in Dior's sketches. He gave him the capital to open his own fashion house at 30 Avenue Montaigne in Paris. And in February 1947, Christian Dior unveiled what the press immediately called the new look. Full skirts that used 20 yards of fabric, cinched waists that made women look like living sculptures, an explosion of femininity and luxury after 6 years of wartime austerity and ration cards. The world gasped. Women in Paris wept. The new look was a revolution, not just in fashion, but in hope. Overnight, Christian Dior became the most famous fashion brand on earth. And Marcel Boussac was the man who made it happen. But here's the tragedy. And if you're a business person, this should make your stomach hurt. Boussac was brilliant at one thing: spotting creative genius. He was catastrophically bad at everything else. While the luxury division printed money, the rest of his empire was rotting from the inside. The textile mills were relics, machinery from the 1920s. The factories were inefficient, overstaffed, bleeding cash. He refused to modernize. He refused to cut costs. He kept pouring money into dying cotton factories and losing racehorses, while cheap imports from Asia and North Africa were devouring his margins alive. It's the classic trap. A man builds something great, then becomes so emotionally attached to every piece of it that he can't let go of the parts that are killing him. Boussac loved his factories the way Bernard Arnault's mother loved Dior magazines, with devotion that had nothing to do with logic. By the late 1970s, now, here's where the story gets brilliant, and this is the part that separates Bernard Arnault from every other businessman you've ever heard of. When Arnault looked at Boussac Saint-Frères, he didn't see it a bankrupt textile company. He saw a portfolio, a collection of assets sitting inside a single legal structure, some worthless, some mediocre, and a few absolutely priceless. And his engineer's brain, that polytechnique-trained, systems-thinking, pattern-recognizing brain, immediately began sorting everything into two categories. Category 1, things worth keeping. Category 2, things to destroy. The cotton mills, worthless. Sell them. The textile weaving factories, worthless. Close them. The diaper manufacturing division. Yes, Boussac manufactured diapers under the brand Comfort, worthless. Dump it. The newspaper, marginal at best. Sell it. But Christian Dior, priceless. One of the 5 most recognizable brand names on the planet. A name that transcends borders, languages, economies, and generations. A name that a New York taxi driver knows. And there was another hidden gem that almost nobody was paying attention to. Le Bon Marché, the oldest department store in Paris, opened in 1838, a landmark on the left bank. The kind of building that tourists photograph, undervalued, overlooked, forgotten in the chaos of the bankruptcy proceedings. Arnault's plan was breathtakingly simple, devastatingly elegant, and completely secret. Buy everything. Keep Dior and Le Bon Marché. Destroy everything else. But there was a problem, a massive deal-killing problem. Bernard Arnault didn't have nearly enough money. Freres, his real estate company on the French Riviera, was profitable, but buying Boussac would require serious capital, hundreds of millions of francs. The Arnault family fortune, built over generations in the construction and real estate business, totaled approximately $15 million. Substantial for a family, a rounding error for a deal this size. Arnault needed a partner, and not just any partner. He needed someone with access to enormous sums of money, someone who understood the brutal art of French corporate warfare, someone with political connections at the highest levels of government, and, critically, someone who wouldn't ask too many uncomfortable questions about his real intentions. He found exactly that in the most powerful investment bank in France, Lazard Freres. Stop here, because you need to understand what Lazard Freres was and why their involvement changes everything. Lazard Freres was not a normal bank. It was the shadow government of French capitalism. Founded in the 1840s by 3 brothers from Alsace, Lazard had evolved over 140 years into the most elite, most secretive, most politically connected financial institution in France. When the French government needed to privatize a national industry, they called Lazard. When a family dynasty needed to restructure without public embarrassment, they called Lazard. When powerful men needed to acquire, but here's the key detail. The detail that makes this whole story work, and the detail that reveals exactly who Bernard Arnault really is. The French government wasn't just selling Boussac to the highest bidder. This was France. This was a socialist government. François Mitterrand was still president. The labor unions had enormous political power. Any buyer at all, would have to guarantee that workers would be protected, that factories would stay open, that the great French industrial heritage of Boussac Saint-Frères would be preserved. Bernard Arnault sat across from the government officials. He looked them in the eye, and he made every promise they wanted to hear. He would preserve jobs. He would maintain the factories. He would respect the workers and their unions. He would invest in the industrial operations. He would be a responsible, patriotic steward of this great French enterprise. He was lying. Not partially, not in a grey area, spin doctor kind of way. Bernard Arnault made specific, detailed promises that he had absolutely zero intention of keeping. His entire plan, the plan he'd crafted with Antoine Bernheim in the oak-panelled offices of Lazard Freres, the plan he'd been refining in his head since that taxi ride in New York, required the systematic, methodical dismantlement of everything in Boussac that wasn't Dior or Le Bon Marché. The factories had to close, the textile divisions had to be sold, and the workers, thousands upon thousands of workers, had to go. He knew it before he signed the papers. Bernheim knew it. The financial models showed it. The math demanded it. And nobody else in the room had a clue. In January 1985, Bernard Arnault officially took control of Boussac Saint-Frères. He was 35 years old. He had just become the owner of Christian Dior, and the clock started ticking on the most brutal corporate restructuring France had ever seen. If that's first, he separated the precious from the dead. Dior was immediately ring-fenced, protected, funded, given resources and attention. Le Bon Marché received investment and a plan for renewal. These were the crown jewels. They were untouchable. Everything else, everything was on the chopping block. The cotton mills in northern France, towns his own family had lived near, sold. The textile weaving operations in the Vosges, sold. The diaper manufacturing division, Confort, sold. The newspaper holdings, sold. Factory after factory, division after division, asset after asset, stripped away, liquidated, discarded like the wrapping paper around a Christmas present. And with each sale, each closure, each liquidation, workers lost their jobs. Not a handful, not a few hundred. Thousands upon thousands of French men and women who had worked their entire lives in these factories, who had no other skills, no other prospects, no other identity beyond the work they did with their hands, were told to go home for good. The first wave hit the textile workers in the north, the very region where Arnault himself had grown up. These were people from towns like Roubaix, like Tourcoing, like Cambrai, towns where the Arnault family name was known, towns where people had worked in factories for 3, 4, 5 generations. They were fired, laid off, eliminated, restructured. That cold corporate word that means your life just ended, and someone far away made a spreadsheet that said it should. The numbers climbed relentlessly. 500, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 7,000. By the time Bernard Arnault finished his butchering, 9,000 workers had lost their jobs, 9,000 families, 9,000 dinner tables where someone had to explain that the factory was gone and the money had stopped so that one man could own a fashion house. The media went nuclear. French newspapers, the same press that had barely noticed the quiet acquisition of a bankrupt textile company, now turned on Arnault with a fury that shocked even the political establishment. Headlines screamed across front pages. Le liquidateur, l'homme qui dépece, 9,000 jobs sacrificed on the altar of Dior. But the name that stuck, the name that would shadow Bernard Arnault for decades, was the one that the workers themselves gave him. Le Terminator. Because while France burned with anger on the outside, something extraordinary was happening on the inside. Bernard Arnault was bringing Christian Dior back from the dead. He didn't buy Dior as a trophy. He bought it because he understood, with that cold mathematical precision that defines everything about him, exactly what a great luxury brand is and what it can become when managed correctly. Under Boussac's neglect, Dior had been coasting. The old man had let the brand drift on its legendary name. While the world moved on, the designs felt dated. The stores looked tired. The marketing was an afterthought. Dior, in the early 1980s, was a ghost, a legendary name echoing in an empty room. Arnault changed everything. He brought in young designers, fresh, creative blood. He gave them absolute artistic freedom. Design whatever you want. Push every boundary, shock the world. But he paired that freedom with something the luxury world had never seen: ruthless financial discipline. Every collection had to make money, every store had to hit targets, every product had to justify its existence on a balance sheet. Art plus engineering, beauty plus math. It was the Arnault formula. And nobody in the luxury industry had ever seen anything like it. Within 3 years, Dior's revenue had doubled. The brand was relevant again. Fashion editors were writing about it. Customers were flooding the stores, and Bernard Arnault understood something that nobody else in France could see. What he'd done to Boussac wasn't a one-time play. It was a template, a repeatable formula. Find great brands with terrible management. Buy them cheap. Fire everyone who doesn't perform. Install young creative talent. Control the money with an iron fist. And watch the value multiply. He was 37 years old. He owned Christian Dior. He'd proven his formula worked. And he had already spotted his next target. It was bigger than Dior, it was more iconic, and getting it would require the most audacious boardroom betrayal in the history of French business. Its name was Louis Vuitton. And that story is coming in part 3. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who thinks business is polite. Because what Bernard Arnault does next makes the Boussac deal look like a friendly handshake. The wolf has tasted blood, and the wolf is still hungry.